Thank you, Ni, for your kind words. I want to welcome you also now to today's webinar, also from my side. I am Egerer, a senior researcher at the University of Helsinki, and I'm also the vice chair of the Finnish Association for Alcohol, Drug and Gambling Research. And I will be chairing the webinar today. The webinar is organized by Egerer in cooperation with the Finnish Association for Alcohol, Drug and Gambling Research. And I would like to thank Egerer for making this webinar possible. But I want to express also, specifically and especially my gratitude to Neo Morogele and her team from the University of Johannesburg for not only providing the technical basis for it that we can discuss here and talk here over Zoom, but also for the state-of-the-art promotion of the event. Today, we will look at substance use and gambling during COVID-19 pandemic in Finland. The Finnish way of tackling the COVID-19 pandemic has received praise worldwide, keeping incidence of diseases and mortality low, while simultaneously aiming to restrict citizen rights and freedom as little as possible. This is what we wrote into our webinar proposal to Egerer during the downward trend of the second wave in the beginning of this year. In the meanwhile, a lot has happened globally and also in Finland. Vaccination progress, particularly in the US, the UK and Israel, had a considerable impact on the pandemic in these countries. On the other side, with rising incidences during the third wave, also the Finnish government prepared restrictive measures such as a legally binding obligation to wear a face mask or even curfews. In the end, these laws did not come to pass, though rather due to deficiencies and quarrels in the lawmaking process than the development of the pandemic itself. Currently, Finland is once again in the group of European countries with the lowest incidences. Though, as we know, as the pandemic is not over yet, we might also still face some unpleasant surprises. The flattening of the third wave, even without the restrictive laws like curfew or obligation to wear masks, like legally binding obligation to wear masks, has probably to some degree to do with the closing of restaurants, which on the other side is a rather mild strategy, at least from citizens' rights and freedom perspective. Yet the steep decrease of cases had probably also something to do with a high trust of the Finnish population in their authorities and their state as well, welfare state. The population reduced social contacts even without the restrictive laws, just by listening to the wake-up call by the authorities. So, all well in Finland? Hardly. Also in Finland, psychosocial and socio-economic hardships have been accumulating during the pandemic. This obviously applies particularly for the ones with often the least social and economic resources to start with. Consequently, the COVID-19 pandemic has proved a challenge, looking from the point of view of substance use-related harm. The partial closure of society and related hygiene measures have also had effects on gambling. Electronic gambling machines were, for example, shut down during the lockdown in spring 2020. This webinar focuses on what kind of consequences the Finnish strategy of curbing the pandemic has had on alcohol, drug, and gambling consumption, and the related harms in the context of a Nordic welfare state. While the processes are excessively complex, the example of Finland with a social democratic welfare regime can prove enlightening. Before starting now with the presentations, I want to give you some organizational information. The first half of the webinar will be recorded, and the second half obviously not. After each presentation, there will be around 5 minutes time for you to ask questions or also give small comments. Then during the last part of the webinar, after all the presentations have been given, there's then time for an overall discussion. If you want to comment or ask questions, please ask for your turn by writing to the chat or use the Q&A function of the Zoom. I will then open your microphone. And otherwise, well, please keep the microphone closed at all times, but I guess in this version of Zoom, you cannot open it yourself anyway. Still a short information on the program. We changed the order of presentation slightly due to some organizational reasons. So Atte, Oksanen and Riitta Matilainen will switch place, and Atte's presentation will be thus third and not the second one. And Riitta's obviously will already speak after Mika's presentation. But now let's start with the presentations. The first presentation title is the COVID-19 pandemic and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs in Finland, a review of the crime statistics of the police. Presentation will be given by Mika Sutela, who is working as an information analyst in the Police Traffic Safety Center at the Helsinki Police Department. He is an adjunct professor of empirical criminal justice research at University of Eastern Finland. Mika has a PhD in law, and his research focuses on quantitative criminology and criminal justice issues, such as sentencing and traffic offenses. So Mika, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for Egerer for this webinar. My name is Mika Sutela, and as Michael said, I am currently working as information analyst in Police Traffic Safety Center in Helsinki. And today I will tell you about driving under the influence offenses in Finland, the statistics point of view, how the situation looked like last year during COVID, and also I will show some stats from the previous years, how the number of offenses has developed. Alcohol is the main substance in Finland, and it forms the greatest risk of traffic safety. And in Finland, we have had so-called R studies, mass crackdowns, and the latest one was conducted 3 years ago. And there it has been found that about every 800 driver in traffic law has had a higher blood alcohol concentration than the limit 0.5 per mil is. And according to the recent Finnish surveys, the police parameter, and a survey conducted by the Finnish Road Safety Council, Liikenneturva, people are worried about driving under the influence as a criminal phenomenon. It's considered really severe crime. Recent years, despite of this alcohol situation, that it's the main substance, more and more drug users and drug drivers have been have been caught by the police, and drug driving has been a quite hot topic in Finland. Amphetamine and cannabis are commonly detected substances, but often situation is such that drug drivers have used several different substances. In general, experimentation and use of drugs has become more common, and especially among 25-34 years old people. And we could say that attitudes and opinions toward drugs have changed during latest years. The National Institute for Health and Welfare, DHL, has conducted wastewater studies in Finland during the latest decade. And last year, it was found that in March, drug use was at a record high level. Afterwards, it decreased, but again increased in summertime. And it was also found that amphetamine was the most used drug, and it was it's used more than ever before here. In this table, we can see that amphetamine is the relative risk of serious injury or death in traffic accidents is significantly increased with amphetamine, and it's, if you compare to alcohol, the risk is more or less similar than 1 per mil. And if there is mixed use of alcohol and drugs, so then the risk is even higher. And aggravated drunk driving. Alcohol-based driving under the influence is at the same risk level. If we think about this pandemic and exceptional circumstances, so it of course influence people's life and how people are living, and also criminality. Usually we could think that the result of less people in public is less crime. So when there are less people outside, so one may think that more or not more, less crime are recorded. But actually the situation can be opposite. Financial distress and uncertainty about the future, for example, can increase crime during crisis, and in traffic when there are less vehicles, less traffic, that can influence traffic offenses. In these exceptional circumstances, criminality is largely explained by the same factors as crime in normal circumstances, but the difference is in motives and crime opportunities. For example, routine activities of people can change in exceptional circumstances, and that's an important background factor influencing criminality. Last year, people stayed at home and there was less traffic, and people may believe that there was no control almost at all, but actually, at least in Finland, the police had actually more chances to do traffic enforcement, and it was relatively more efficient than before. It was easier to pick up impaired drivers and speeders from traffic flow. Here in this figure, we can see number of COVID-19 cases per 100 tests in Finland. And immediately in the beginning, March 2020, the numbers were really high. And in summertime, numbers were very low. In September, numbers began to grow slowly until March this year, and now the trend is showing more positive trend again. In Finland, we have two limits for DUI offenses. In alcohol-based offenses, the so-called basic drunk driving limit is 0.5 promille, and aggravated drunk driving 1.2. And since 2003, we have had zero tolerance for drugs in traffic. Almost all drug-based driving under the influence offenses are recorded as basic DUI, because we don't have any certain and clear limit for when the criminal act is such that it could be classified as aggravated, serious DUI offense. Last year we had over 20,000 DUI offenses recorded by the police. It was a bit more than the previous years. About 36% of cases were aggravated, and the percentage was even 65 in alcohol-based cases. And last year we had alcohol and drug-based cases about 50-50. So that was actually, as we can see here in this figure, situation was new. It was the first time when the percentages were almost the same, about 47%. Mixed cases were about 7% of all offenses. If we look at 4 latest years, last year monthly average was to 1,100 approximately, and if we compare it to the previous average of monthly average of the 3 previous years, there was plus 17%, slightly increase. In alcohol-based cases, so-called basic DUIs under 1.2 per mil, there was moderate decrease last year, but when we look at drug-based cases, there was up to 43% increase. When we look at alcohol-based aggravated DUI offenses, we can see that there was not any proper change last year, and it has the numbers have been quite stable level during recent years. So last year DUI offenses increased slightly, but drug-based ones more strongly. We can only guess what are the possible explanations and causes of the situation. Of course, we had less traffic, empty roads. There were a few events outside or inside. Restaurants and bars were closed. People used their own vehicles, cars, motorcycles instead of public transport. Traffic enforcement of police was relatively more efficient than before, and enforcement focused on just impaired drivers and serious speeders. And of course, this increased drug use in the population level can influence the situation and number of drug driving offenses. And when there is more tolerant attitudes in population, it appears also, it's evident in traffic. In the end, I would say that we have to remember also these alcohol cases, especially aggravated ones. It's these aggravated alcohol-based DUI offenses are still quite a big problem here in Finland, and if we just focus on drug driving, we don't know how these serious alcohol cases change in the future. Here I have some English literature. And thank you. This was my presentation.
Thank you, Mika, for a really interesting presentation, and thanks also for keeping like perfect track of time. It's really on the minute, on the spot. So if the audience has questions, you can put them in the Q&A. But since there are like about 22 attendees, you can also ask that I open up your mic and you can ask yourself. So please, if you have questions or comments, there are now about 5 minutes we could use for that. Not now at once any, so maybe I can ask a question. When I was looking at the graphs you were showing, I was wondering if this change between drunk driving and drug driving, but the drug driving has become more prevalent. Would you say this is a general trend, or is there also like an impact of the COVID pandemic on this?
I would say that it's a more general trend. The numbers of drug driving cases started to increase from, well, let's say 2012, 13. So it's not just this COVID phenomenon. Of course, there might be some COVID influence, COVID effect as well, but in general, there is more long-term trend.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the audience? If you don't have anything to ask now, or if you still need time to think about the question, you can also like ask specific questions at the very end again. So I think we move on. Thank you, Mika.
Thank you.
And the next presentation is COVID-19 and the repercussions of the closing of decentralized slot machines and gambling arcades in Finland in 2020 and 2021. And Riitta Matilainen has a PhD in social sciences from the University of Helsinki in Finland. She is an economic and social historian who specializes in the history of gambling and in the methodological questions concerning class and gender in gambling studies. Her latest article, written together with PhD Maria Heiskanen, dealt with the Finnish baby boomer generation as gamblers and how to prevent and recognize gambling harm that they experience with the help of intersectional approach. Riitta works currently as a head of Gambling Harm Prevention Unit at EHYT, the Finnish Association for Substance Abuse and Prevention. So Riitta, please.
Thank you, Mihail. So this will be interesting. I have my 7-year-old son with me, so hopefully he will be quiet, but we'll see. So Mihail already introduced me, and I'm here to talk about COVID-19 and the repercussions of the closing of the decentralized slot machines and gambling arcades in Finland in previous year and this year. So here are the main questions of my presentation. So I'm asking what happened when COVID-19 forced to shut down both the decentralized slot machines and gambling arcades here in Finland. And I also discuss what were the repercussions of closings to recreational gamblers, to at-risk and problem gamblers and their significant others, to the gambling monopoly holder Veikkaus. So please remember Veikkaus is the gambling monopoly holder. You'll be hearing a lot about Veikkaus in this presentation. And what were the repercussions to the different stakeholders and to the Finnish state as well? And I might add that Finnish state is heavily dependent on Veikkaus profits. And I will also very briefly discuss how these closures or shutdowns were discussed both on print media and on social media. And finally, I will wrap up by suggesting that there could be something to be learned from all this from the perspective of gambling harm prevention also internationally. So here are the sources of my presentation. So the presentation is based on various sources. So as Mihail introduced me, I work at the Finnish Association for Substance Abuse Prevention, EHYT. And since last year, we've conducted three different opinion polls. One was statistically representative research survey done by Finnish market research company Taloustutkimus. We did that last spring. And then we've also conducted 2 online polls. One last year and one this year. And they are not statistically representative, but they offer us interesting information about what has been going on with gambling and COVID-19 in Finland. So I also use print media and social media analysis as one of my sources. And then there is also Veikkaus information about the changes of gambling behavior during the COVID-19 epidemic. And the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, THL, and also various other NGOs like Peliklinikka and Peluri that help problem gamblers have published various reports on gambling in Finland during COVID-19 epidemic. And then I've also used some academic research that has already been made about gambling during COVID-19 era. So here's the outline of the presentation, and here you can see an actual footage of what Finnish slot machines look like. I will be telling more about the history of slot machines very briefly. But here's the outline of the presentation. So I will be talking about history of slot machines in Finland. Then I will move on to COVID-19 and restrictions on gambling on slot machines because we had certain restrictions. and there still are. And then I will discuss repercussions of shutdowns on different people. And then I will shortly deal with the public discussion and what can be learned, and then I will show you my sources. A lot of them are unfortunately only in Finnish, but I've included some that are in English, so they are available for the international audience as well. So when it comes to the history of slot machines in Finland, so this is one of my favorite things in the world. My PhD dealt with the history of Finnish gambling in the 20th century. So this is kind of what I did before. So what makes Finnish gambling culture interesting in the international comparison is the abundance of decentralized slot machines that are placed in everyday consumption places such as grocery stores, service stations, cafes, kiosks, restaurants, bars, you name it, they are there. And this decentralization process began in the 1970s. There have been slot machines in Finland since the 1920s, but this decentralization started really in the 1970s. But it was especially during the 1990s severe economic depression that their number grew. It was decided by the Finnish state that the state wanted more money. They were out of money. It was a really, really, really bad depression going on in Finland. And so they just made the decision that, okay, we will put more slot machines in everyday consumption places so that we could get more funding. And that's what happened. So there is also an age limit. You have to be 18 years to gamble in Finland, and that includes also slot machines. But this is also interesting. This became reality only in 2011. Before that, you had to be 15 to be able to play on slot machines. So this is something that has changed only in 10 years, only in a decade. So in the beginning of 2020, there were 18,500 decentralized slot machines. By the end of the year, there were circa 10,400. I will get more into this. And on top of these decentralized slot machines, there are 2,750 slot machines in the Veikkaus gambling arcades and in a casino in Helsinki. So it's kind of funny that we have a lot of decentralized slot machines everywhere, but we only have one casino in the country, which is situated in Helsinki. So that is kind of interesting as well. So all these slot machines are owned by Veikkaus, and which is also interesting, there are almost no illegal slot machines in Finland. So meaning that there is no organized crime relating to slot machines. I know that, for example, in Sweden there is, so this is also an interesting point I want to make. So obviously, there have been quite a lot of problems with slot machines in Finland. So underage gambling has been discussed lately. So even now, when you have to be 18 to be able to gamble, so in the previous years it has been quite, I would say, too easy to be able to gamble even though you're underage. But this thing is now changing, and I will talk a bit more about it a bit later. And if we think about the history, so it really has been so that these decentralized slot machines have historically caused most gambling harm and gambling problems. That has been the case. And people who are recovering from problem gambling, they always say that this decentralization makes it difficult for those people to go about their daily businesses, because it's not easy for them to go to a grocery store and do their business there, because there are slot machines there as well. And what is also interesting is that these decentralized slot machines have been a target of feverish societal discussion on both print media and social media during the past decade or so. So I will go through this slide very briefly. So when COVID-19 started in March 2020, so Veikkaus shut down both the decentralized slot machines and its gambling arcades in March. And then they were opened again. The arcades were opened in June 2020 because there weren't that many COVID cases in the summer. And the decentralized slot machines were opened in mid-July 2020. But then, I don't know, was it the second wave? I've lost count of all the waves going on with this awful disease. So, but as the infection rates rose again, so Veikkaus closed again its decentralized slot machines and arcades in November December 2020. So basically slot machines in most areas of Finland were closed then. But now gambling arcades and the casino in Helsinki, they are again open. And those decentralized slot machines are open in grocery stores and kiosks, but not in bars, cafes, and restaurants. And due to COVID-19, there were also other things that were made. So the loss limits of Veikkaus fast-paced online gambling games were lowered. I forgot to put there online. So it was thought that by lowering these limits, people would be protected against gambling harm, because obviously with the onset of COVID-19, there were a lot of furloughs on unemployed people and so on. So at the same time, but not due to the COVID-19, the number of decentralized slot machines was reduced from 18,500 to 10,400. So this is a 40% reduction. And Veikkaus did it. And furthermore, the decentralized slot machines opened only at 11 a.m. and were closed at the latest at 4 a.m. So before that, I guess it was so that these slot machines opened when the places where they were located opened. So this was a big change. Let me put it that way. So, but what happened? What were the repercussions of the closing of decentralized slot machines and gambling arcades for recreational gamblers? So, it seems that many recreational gamblers reduced their gambling, especially during the first lockdown of spring 2020. And many recreational gamblers used less money in gambling than before. And most importantly, there does not seem to have been a major transition from brick and mortar gambling to online gambling, even though Finns are used to online gambling. Because this was something that I personally, and I know that many other researchers and people working in the field were kind of expecting that people would turn to online gambling, but that didn't seem to happen. So, as I said, recreational gamblers did not substitute decentralized slot machines gambling with online slot gambling, and that is kind of interesting. So what happened with the at-risk and problem gamblers? So many at-risk and problem gamblers were relieved when these decentralized slot machines were closed. They stated that they can now do their grocery shopping without stress, and money usually spent on slot machines could be used to necessities like food. And this was also the case with people contacting Peluri. So Peluri is a Finnish organization that helps people who experience gambling harm and gambling problems. So for the first time in a long time, the number of contacts that they got started to decrease, and this was because the decentralized slot machines, which historically have caused most of the problems, were closed. So that is interesting as well. And then on significant others, and by on significant others, I mean people who are close to people who experience gambling harm and problem gambling, may they be spouses or sisters or fathers or friends or relatives or whatever, but I call them significant others. So in the Finnish gambling population study, 21% of the respondents, so approximately almost 800,000 people, so the Finnish population is about 5.6 million, reported having one or more significant other who had a gambling problem. So this polarization of experiencing gambling harm and gambling problems was also visible in the online poll that we made for significant others of gamblers in the spring of 2021. I'm sorry, that's the wrong year there. So this is based on our latest poll. So some gamblers had paused gambling due to shutting down of decentralized slot machines and so on. But some had more opportunities to gamble because of distant work, which is really the craze in Finland at the moment, or because they had been made redundant, or they were on furlough. So many significant others wanted to get help for the gamblers and also for themselves, and they were frustrated that help was not easily available due to COVID-19 epidemic. So then, what happened with Veikkaus? So this is also interesting. So Veikkaus profit for the financial year of 2020 was 680 million euros, which is almost 33% less than last year. So there was a really, really big change. And what is interesting, so that slot machines that generated almost slot machines generated almost 300 million euros last year, whereas in 2019, they generated 683 million euros. So that is a really, really big change. So I'm kind of thinking that what happens with the legitimacy of Veikkaus and its monopoly if it cannot produce as much revenue as it used to? So what happens with the stakeholders? So COVID-19 and Veikkaus responsible gambling measures have made it impossible for Veikkaus to generate revenue at the expected and needed level, thus meaning that the funding received by beneficiaries from gambling proceeds will diminish, because the gambling proceeds in Finland are used for good causes. And this causes obviously uncertainty for the future of the civil society, for the NGOs, and I also work for one of these NGOs. And it also causes uncertainty for other beneficiaries like sports, art, science, and youth work. And then what happened with the Finnish state? So Veikkaus is owned 100% by the Finnish state. Therefore, the Finnish state is constantly under pressure to strengthen its corporate governance of Veikkaus. And I would dare to argue that the responses to COVID-19 can be interpreted as signs of the state stepping in and protecting its citizens. So the state also protected its citizens via what Veikkaus did in a way. So, but historically, the state has been able to trust that Veikkaus produces more and more revenue every year to be distributed to the beneficiaries. And this used to be the case. But this funding has been a really important part of the financing of the Finnish welfare state, as I stated in my PhD. But this now has fundamentally changed. And I dare to say that the role of the Veikkaus has to be reinvented. So very briefly, as I said earlier, there has been a heated public discussion going on about decentralized slot machines even before the COVID era started. So closing of these slot machines has been praised on social media by people who have experienced or who are experiencing gambling harm and gambling problems, and also by experts by experience. So there has been a lot of talk about how good it has been for them that the decentralized slot machines were closed. This is also interesting. We have a German-based grocery store chain, Lidl, also here in Finland. I guess you have it in your countries as well. And Lidl was the first grocery store chain that decided to remove all the slot machines from their stores. And this decision was really, really big news in the Finnish media. And it was widely debated, and it was thought that this marked a change in the policies of grocery store chains towards slot machines. I will skip that, sorry for that. So what next? So this is interesting. Compulsory authentication covering slots gambling was introduced to the decentralized slot machines in January this year. But it is kind of interesting. We don't have that much experiences of this procedure yet, because the slot machines have been shut down for so long, and now they've only been open for, I don't know, for a couple of weeks or so in the most in most of Finland. So Veikkaus will adapt compulsory authentication, also in its gambling arcades in this summer. So this means that players have a chance to set a complete ban on their gambling if they wish to do so. And the aim is also to root out underage gambling, which has been a problem so far. So this is of extreme importance. We have to see what happens, whether this actually works, so that this procedure will prevent gambling harm and will prevent underage gambling. And we also have a reformation of the Lotteries Act going on at the moment. So it should come into effect in next year. And for the first time, it is stated out loud that prevention of harm must be taken into account when placing slot machines. And particularly minors and otherwise vulnerable persons are to be protected. That is what it says in the version of the new Lotteries Act that I've read and that I've had the chance to comment. So, but what this means in practice remains to be seen. So finally, what can be learned from the Finnish case? So, and from COVID-19, I guess, as well. So these kind of unforeseen situations offer a great opportunity for research. I've written here carpe diem, meaning really that because COVID-19 started so suddenly, and never before in the history, except during the Second World War, the slot machines have been shut down. So there really are these historical opportunities to do research on. So we should really grab them and do research. And a substitution of slot machine gambling by online gambling did not seem to happen in the Finnish context. Why not? This is baffling. What is it in the Finnish slot machines gambling culture that resists change? This is something that I would like to do research on. And what happens with the public opinion when the unpredictable happens? Does the unpredictable hasten certain tendencies and processes that were already bubbling under? So this remains to be seen as well. And as I work now in the gambling harm prevention field, so what happens with prevention of gambling harm in case the majority of gamblers gamble the same or even reduce their gambling engagement, but a minority of gamblers experience significantly more harm and more problems than before? How can we prevent this further polarization of gambling behavior in a situation where most of the healthcare and NGOs work under enormous pressure because of COVID-19? And the funding of NGOs and other important institutions such as art, science, sports, and youth work should not be solely dependent on the revenues from the gambling sector. So this is something that we have learned now. Really. So here are some of the sources. Here are some of the sources in English. And then there are sources relating to the polls we have done at my workplace, but they are sadly only in Finnish. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Riitta, for this really thrilling insight into the
Thank
Finnish gambling during the COVID pandemic. Are there any questions or comments we can take now during the short 5 minutes we have to? Now we have the question. Thank you. Regarding use of other forms of gambling, what other forms are popular in Finland? Any use of land-based betting shops? How much are other forms of gambling marketed?
Thank you, Simone. So what other forms are popular in Finland? So the most popular forms of gambling in Finland are lotteries. So we have had the tradition of lotto play since 1971. So that is still the most popular game in Finland. And then scratch cards, and they are quite popular. And then obviously slot machines, and then we also have sports betting as well. But we don't have that kind of betting shops that you would have in the UK or in Ireland, because sports betting here in Finland is also the monopoly of Veikkaus as well. So you can do your sports betting in kiosks or in grocery stores or online, because I think most of the sports bettors do it online. Veikkaus has an online shop, so you can do it there. And then there is also trotting. So Finnish people like their horses, and trotting is quite popular in Finland. I'd say not as popular as in Sweden or in France, I might say. I'm not sure, but we still have people who like trotting, and it's trotting, not racing, but trotting traditionally. So there is a difference between the UK and Ireland, for example. And historically, this gambling marketing in Finland is a totally interesting case, because there haven't been. I think it was only in 2010 when the first restrictions on gambling marketing were put in the law, or something like that. So before that, especially Veikkaus has been really good at marketing gambling. So historically, that is one of the reasons why Finnish people are so eager gamblers, because they've been kind of taught to gamble via Veikkaus marketing and so on. So yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I understand that correctly? That question. How much are other forms of gambling marketed? Well, yeah. Sorry. I kind of misunderstood it. Kind of. Other forms of gambling are marketed as well. Nowadays, slot machines are not allowed to be marketed anymore, because they are thought as risky games, which they are. We know that they cause most addiction and most problems and so on. But lotteries, for example, they are marketed. They are you can market them, and there has been a lot of marketing going on. Now Veikkaus has diminished its marketing, because there was this really heated public discussion about marketing about 2 years ago in Finland, and Veikkaus had to kind of tone down, or how would you say it? Had to be really careful with what they do with their marketing at the moment, and that is obviously a good thing, because less there is marketing, less there is gambling harm.
Thank you. There's still one more question in the Q&A, and if you could answer that shortly. So Andrea Mohan.
Yes, sorry.
Is online gambling also controlled, regulated by the same gambling company? Trying to understand why online gambling did not substitute slot machine gambling.
Well, I'm trying to understand that. I'm struggling to understand that as well. I don't know why. It could be that there are some sections of people that like to do brick and mortar slots gambling that are really not interested in going online, and who are not for some reason able to do it online. But I would say that more that they are not really interested in doing it online. So I don't know. It might have something to do with socializing, even though I know that some people like to go and play slot machines with their friends and so on. So they don't want to do it online alone. That might be one of the reasons. I don't know, but this is kind of a thing that we in Finland, Mihail also, who is also a gambling researcher, we should do research on. So can't really answer that question, sorry.
Okay, and let's take the question from Joel Francis still. Could you comment whether the decreased gambling rates during COVID is likely to be permanent? And please be swift.
I don't know.
That at the end of the session.
That is like €1 million question. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. We can discuss this more then at the end, at the overall discussion.
Yeah, we will. Thank you.
Deeper into it.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.